Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see you all here. On this cool, rainy morning, a respite from the heat of summer and the drought, a blessing for the plants. So recently we've been talking about the Eightfold Path. It's the foundational teaching of the Buddha. And we've talked about right view and right intention. And today we'll be discussing right speech. Now, for some of you, that term, that very phrase, right speech, will strike a sour chord. It might sound authoritarian. Sort of 1984-ish right speech. So if you feel that way about it, you can substitute in your mind skillful speech or beneficial speech or nonviolent speech or kind speech. Now, the Buddha, being very methodical, had a definition for what constitutes right speech. And it's sort of expressed in terms of negatives. Right speech is not false speech. It's not divisive speech. It's not abusive speech. And it's not idle chatter. Those four things. So all of those are open to considerable interpretation. And for instance, idle chatter. What is idle chatter? When you ask someone how they are and comment on the weather, is that idle chatter? When you talk about the Cardinals game, is that idle chatter? Well, you can take whatever position you feel comfortable with on that, but I've come to believe that some of that conversational speech is a way of helping us bond with one another, is a way of helping remind us that we are kindred, that we're going through this together. So I would not put that in the category of idle chatter, but some might. And it depends on the context. If you're at a retreat and there are sort of rules about speech for the retreat, some of that talk may be inappropriate for the context. So those four things is the way the Buddha defined right speech. But in another sutta, he talked about 5 characteristics of right speech. And sort of 5 questions to ask yourself when contemplating speaking. especially if if what you're about to say has some momentousness to it. And we'll get to that in a minute, but the 5 questions were, is it true? Is what you're about to say reflect reality as you truly see it or recall it? Is it timely? Is it kind? Is it spoken out of goodwill? And is it beneficial? Is it better said than unsaid? True, timely, kind, with goodwill, beneficial. Those 5 tests. So much speech is fairly natural among us and doesn't lead to harm. But some kinds of speech are particularly difficult. And I'd like to talk about those two examples of the kind of speech that can be difficult. And one is an apology. An apology can be difficult. And the other is an admonition. That can be difficult. So in discussing this, I'm going to use an example from the recent past that appeared in the news. And I did distribute via email transcripts of this example, and some of you may have had a chance to look at that, but if you haven't, it's no problem. I'll refer to it. And I'd like to start by just recounting, to the best of my ability, the episode, the event that occurred. And this event involves an exchange of speech. So not long ago, and I'm going to try to stick to what has been reported by third-party observers and not to subsequent accounts by the involved parties. So not long ago in Congress, there was discussion in the House of Representatives about crime. The problem of crime, the perennial problem of crime. And as one might expect, there were different opinions about factors leading to crime. And there was certain factionalism. And in one faction, and expressed by Representative Ocasio-Cortez, poverty and unemployment were significant contributors to crime. And the other faction characterized crime as being more of a problem of personal character, and not so much circumstance. So following this discussion in Congress subsequently, Representative Ocasio-Cortez was going up the steps of the Capitol in order to cast a vote on a subsequent day. And coming down the steps, was Representative Yoho from Florida. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, as you may know, is from New York, represents the 14th district there. And as she was walking up the steps, Representative Yoho came to her, stood close, and said forcefully that he disagreed with her on her position that poverty and unemployment were significant factors contributing to crime. And he used the term disgusting. You're disgusting. You're out of your freaking mind, as reported by a reporter who was standing nearby. And Representative Ocasio-Cortez responded that she thought Representative Yoho was being rude. And then but he apparently wouldn't let go of it at that point and responded that he thought she was being rude. And then she left the conversation and continued on her way up the steps of the Capitol. And then Representative Yoho, who was accompanied by another Representative, Williams, said within earshot of another reporter that she's a effing bee. And of course, that was newsworthy, and it appeared very quickly. The reporter couldn't overlook that, and it appeared in the news very quickly, and of course, became sort of viral news. Well, this was obviously a problem for Representative Yoho, and he responded by requesting a point of personal privilege on the floor of the House to make a statement about the event. And I'm not going to read his whole statement, but I'll just refer to parts of it. He starts off that he's wanting to apologize for the abrupt manner of the conversation I had with my colleague from New York. It is true that we disagree on policies and visions for America, but that does not mean we should be disrespectful. And then he goes on, having been married for 45 years with 2 daughters, I'm very cognizant of my language. And denies that he said the offensive name that were attributed to him to his colleague. And then he continues, I'm passionate about those affected by poverty. My wife Carol and I started out together at the age of 19 with nothing. We did odd jobs. We were on food stamps. I know the face of poverty, and for a time it was mine. That is why I know people in this country can still, with all its faults, rise up and succeed and not be encouraged to break the law. And he says, I will commit to you that I will conduct myself from a place of passion and understanding that policy and political disagreement be vigorously debated. As we approach the problems facing our country. He says, I cannot apologize for my passion for loving my God, my family, and my country, and concludes in that manner. So, so that was presented as an apology. Now, the word apology changed meaning over time. It comes from the Greek word apology, apologia, that meant at the time to the Greeks a defense. And some of you may know that there's one of the writings of Plato is called the Apology, and it has to do with Socrates' defense when he was tried for corrupting youth. And there's nothing apologetic about it. It's clearly a defense of his behavior, not admitting any wrongdoing or expressing remorse. So that's what the word meant to the ancient Greeks. And it actually, as the word came through the various languages, maintained that sense of meaning, I'm told, until about the 16th century, at which time it gained its current meaning, which is more along the lines of admitting the commitment of harm, admitting harm done, and expressing remorse. Now, in the Buddhist canon, there's the word apology doesn't come up to my knowledge, but there's a very closely related concept of repentance. And I would say that repentance is very close to what we mean currently by apology. And repentance for a Buddhist involves several elements. One is admission of having done harm, admission of harm done. And the second is an expression of remorse or regret. I wish I hadn't done that. But the third very important element of repentance is forming an intention not to do it again. In order for the repentance to be meaningful, it has to involve at least an aspiration to change behavior. So I would say that Representative Yoho's response, or Representative Yoho's statement to Congress, was more flavored along the lines of the Greek understanding of apology, more along the lines of a defense than our current understanding of admission of harm done, expression of remorse, and commitment to not let it happen again. So after that, Representative Ocasio-Cortez said that she just couldn't let that stand. She was going to just sort of forget the whole episode, she said subsequently, until he made the statement to Congress. And that motivated her to request her own point of privilege and make her own statement to Congress, which was much longer and involved. And again, I'm going to try to summarize here, and I hope I do it at least some justice. Although I would encourage you, if you want to look up both of these speeches on the internet. You can see videos of them. What Representative Ocasio-Cortez did was along the lines of an admonition. I would call it an admonition. More along the lines of a reprimand. And so the next day, she stood up in Congress and gave a speech. It lasted about 9 minutes. And she recounted the episode. And she expressed dismay that Representative Yoho levied the comments that she did against a congresswoman. She said a congresswoman that not only represents New York's 14th district, but every congresswoman in this country. And she goes on to say that she's encountered this kind of language before from men, that she's worked in restaurants, worked in bars, been on the subway in New York, and encountered this language many times before. She says it's not new, and she says that's the problem. She refers to the fact that Representative Yoho was accompanied by another congressman who said nothing to stop Representative Yoho. And she said that reveals a culture, a lack of impunity and acceptance of violent language against women. And she says that when Representative Yoho made excuses for his behavior, that she could not let that go. She referred to a little passage in Representative Yoho's statement that he had a wife and a daughter, and that, or 2 daughters, and that he was sensitive to language. And she says, I have issue with using women, wives, and daughters as shields and excuses for poor behavior. I am 2 years younger than Mr. Yoho's youngest daughter. And I am someone's daughter too, which was sort of the turning phrase in this whole speech, I think. And she goes on subsequently, when you do that to any woman, what Mr. Yoho did, it gives permission to other men to do that to his daughters. And then she goes on and talks about what defines a decent man. A decent man, when he messes up, as we all are bound to, he tries his best and does apologize, not to save face, not to win a vote. He apologizes genuinely to repair and acknowledge the harm done so we can all move on. And she concludes by saying, I want to thank him for showing the world that you can be a powerful man and accost women. You can take photos and project an image to the world of being a family man and accost women without remorse and with a sense of impunity. Representative Yoho took issue with the word accost subsequently when he was talking with the press. He said he didn't accost her, that he was having a conversation. The word accost means to approach someone and speak boldly or aggressively to them. Accost. So, interestingly to me, the Buddha had some advice about how to admonish someone skillfully. And this appears in sort of the compendium of rules for monastics, the Patimokkha. And there are, again, several elements to it. But he says, before admonishing someone, one should investigate. Am I one who practices purity in bodily action? Am I one who practices purity in speech? Is the heart of goodwill, free from malice, established in me? And am I keeping in mind the teachings? Am I keeping in mind the precepts? So that's just in preparation. And notice that it doesn't say, am I pure in bodily action? Am I pure in speech? Nobody is. It doesn't set an impossible standard for someone to admonish someone. But it just invites them to keep in mind their own frailty, their own faults, their own shortcomings, before embarking on an admonishment of someone else. And then he concludes, the Buddha, about if you're going to admonish someone, he comes back to the theme of right speech and says, is what I am about to say true? Is what I am about to say timely? Am I going to say it in a kind, not a harsh manner? Is it going to be with a heart of goodwill? And is it going to be beneficial? Will it help anything? So that's how the Buddha recommended that we admonish someone. So I'm going to let people draw their own conclusions about these speeches given by Representative Yoho and Representative Ocasio-Cortez in the light of the Buddha's teachings. But I thought they served as helpful examples for us to think about, for us to ponder, not to whip up a lot of emotion, but just to think about how we use speech especially difficult conversations. So I think I'll stop there because I've gone on longer than usual. I thank you for listening, and I invite any comments.